cyber resilience in today's interconnected world. We truly appreciate each of you for taking time with us. Our session will be about an hour, a little less, and promise that this presentation will be eye-opening, full of practical action items, and most importantly, relevant to your job and your company's operating in the future. My name is Shannon Habermill, and I'm the Treasury Services Manager for BOK Financial in Tulsa, and I will be the moderator of today's session. Before we kick off the webinar, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. So, Paul, if you would flip to that next slide. Today's webinar is recorded as we record all of our sessions, and if you have any questions, just know that you can submit those through the Q&A and the chat, which you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Those comments and questions are private. Everyone is on mute. So again, please submit your questions there. They will only be seen by the panelists, and we'll kind of pepper those questions in throughout Paul's presentation today. You can also adjust your view options using the tabs at the right side of the screen. You can use active as a choice to fully see the presentation, and you'll likely also see some percentages right above the PowerPoint where you can adjust kind of how large the PowerPoint is for your viewing. Today's presentation will include 3 polling questions for you all and your participation. We'll use Menti and walk you through how to use that. It's a nice interactive tool. Following the presentation, we will send out an email. This email will go out tomorrow. It will have a link to the Certified Treasury Professional and FPAC certificates. If you're trying to get the more traditional CPE credits, there will be a survey link. Please complete that survey and you will receive your certificate within 2 weeks. We will also include a recording and a deck of today's session on that email, so don't feel like you need to screenshot anything. We will send that out to all attendees, and we will also post our presentation on LinkedIn. We do have one more event in our trilogy this fall, so be on the lookout for updates starting in August and September. Our favorite part about hosting these are using our attendees' ideas for future sessions. So if you have an idea, or if there's something we haven't covered that you'd really like to find you'd like us to find a specialized person and host a session on, if you would, please use the chat and Q&A on the right side of your screen. Any ideas you submit to us will be private to the panelists only. So if you don't mind, just as our first interactive activity, going ahead and plugging in any ideas you have, we'd love to see them. As we began planning for the 2022 series, we recognized that there are many complex issues that our practitioners are trying to solve. And sometimes the answers are simpler than they appear, and there are things that we can do in the present, which is really our theme for this year. As many of our clients and businesses in the community at large have experienced, cyber attacks are on the rise. We've had many clients with ransomware attacks, business email compromise, and just all types of cyber attacks in general. And we know that, I think we've all learned that it does take a multi-layer approach to protect your organization. The human firewall, just each of us individually make a huge difference. There are also managed services, there's cyber insurance, and we could not find a better public speaker or practitioner to lead us through today's journey than Paul Tucker. Paul is the bank's Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer. In this role, Paul leads our cyber team and is responsible for the bank efforts to protect information, which is important to our operation, while ensuring the overall cyber resiliency and privacy of the bank. With over 23 years of building and running enterprise security functions, security engineering, governance, and program management, Paul has had the opportunity to lead many successful teams around security compliance, identity management, incident response, protection, security, and risk management. Prior to joining BOK Financial, Paul managed an information security and risk management team program within a Fortune 500 energy company and has handled a variety of information security issues. He's very active in the nonprofit and serves on quite a few boards within our local community and nationwide. So again, we have a great speaker for today, and this is actually his second session with us on our webinar series. So Paul, I will pass the ball to you. Thank you again for hosting today.
Thanks so much, Shannon. I appreciate the introduction, and it just tells you how old I'm getting now, as long as that intro is taking some time. So, but I appreciate you having me again. I think this is going to be a great topic. There are some buzzword bingo topics or language that we use around here sometimes as cyber experts. So the cyber resilience term is really a buzzword that really talks about ransomware attacks. And as we know in this post-COVID world, our digital business initiatives are expanding the organizational footprint in new ways of our how we do business. And it really is exposing us to great opportunities for the business, but it's also bringing new additional risks to these areas. And so I'm going to talk about some of these risks today. And then as leaders on the phone or as practitioners on the phone, we must ensure that we have applied best practices to have a solid cyber resiliency program. So today, I will give you those best practices and the practical knowledge that my team has to become more cyber resilient. And the beautiful thing I love about this topic and the Energize the Present, I'm not talking about things that are going to take 3 years or 1 year, but really things that can happen right now in the present. So pretty excited to get started on this. And so I'm going to start with what are the 3 questions that maybe your CEO should know, or maybe 3 questions that maybe you should ask your CEO. So first question is, how can cybersecurity threats affect the different functions of my business? And the second one we want to talk about is, what type of critical information could be lost? And the best one we want to talk about today, because this is what the topic is how can my business create long-term resiliency to minimize our cybersecurity risk? And so, we've already got the topics. We're already speaking about that, what you're going to learn. So the importance of being a cyber resilience organization, and we need to understand why this is important. Our second learning objective answers the how. How do I know my cyber resiliency risk? Our third objective is, how do I need to understand the risk to be able to drive down that risk? As companies, we have to accept the risk all the time, but there are certain risks that we want to make sure that we drive down. And then lastly, how do I measure our effectiveness to make sure that we're meeting the mark? And so Shannon spoke a little bit earlier about doing a kind of an interactive poll. And so what you can do now is you can scan that QR code, or you can open up a browser to Minty.com, put in that code, and you'll be able to kind of follow along. You'll be able to vote yourself. And a lot of times these things are very interesting because you don't know who's on the phone. You may see that you have individuals on this, and so that helps a lot during the Q&A. And I want you guys to know also, when you do submit a response, it's anonymous. We won't know who did it. We won't know what company it came from, and so on. So I'm going to start with our first one here. Let me move this one forward. All right, got lots of hearts going. So describe your current role in one word. And so it may be you're in IT, you're a CFO. What kind of area do you come from this? So you can kind of see it growing. I think it's what we would expect to see on some of these areas.
This is very clever, Paul.
Very interesting, and it should grow. So, the fact that CFO is in the middle and a little bit larger, that tells us that we have a few more CFOs on the line. So that's extremely helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, let me go back to the presentation real quick. Okay. So now we're going to get into the importance of being a cyber resiliency organization. And so on let's see what's on now, slide 7, I want to click through these pretty quick because we're going to talk about global interconnectedness. And we may think about, what does interconnectedness mean as part of the title of this presentation. And the way that the internet works nowadays, we should be considering ourselves a global company. And if you don't think so, think about this. So it's estimated that there's going to be 5 billion internet users around the world. And these 5 billion internet users utilize 15 billion mobile devices, and it expects to be 18 billion by 2025. And I find this one, the next statistic, the most interesting is by 2050, every person in the world will have internet. And so that's pretty amazing to understand that. So if your company has an internet presence, are you a global company? Can they reach you? Can they reach your services from anywhere? And the threat actors see it that way. They don't care where you're from. As long as you have an internet connection to your company, that's what they see. And so, yes, we are all, in a sense, a global interconnected company. So let's talk a little bit about the definition. So cyber resiliency is not just about recovery, it's resisting, absorbing, and adapting to disruptions to get back to making revenue. And so, what if we lack cyber resilience? What are some of the outcomes that may happen? So we may lose the ability to operate. We may lose customer trust. It may affect our bottom line. And the worst thing it could do is maybe the survivability of our organization may be at risk. And so these are some things that, business leaders need to understand and how you can address this. Again, we're talking about the importance of being a cyber resiliency organization, and these areas here are the things that we should be worried about. Okay, so Shannon, this may be a good time if there's any questions we want to ask so far, because I'm just going to keep moving if we're ready.
I don't see any just yet, but if you do have any questions, please, again, log into that, or just on the right side of your screen is the chat or Q&A feature, and you can send it to your question to all panelists or the host, but go ahead and send that over. All panelists is probably best, and we'll get those questions asked. So,
all right, thank you, Shannon.
Keep going.
Okay, perfect. So cyber is a component of a larger organizational resiliency framework. So each area is needed for a successful outcome. So I want to build this slide out here a little bit. So when we talk about leadership and we talk about cultures of our companies, when it comes to cyber resiliency, who do we have within the organization that will drive these efforts? A lot of times it's not seen as a core competence of companies, definitely small to medium-sized companies, that they're going to have a good understanding of what this may be. But you need to drive, regardless of what size of company you are, you need to drive to some type of strategic plan around organizational resiliency and then definitely cyber resiliency. Because this is a business issue. This is not an IT issue, because I know we have some smaller companies on here, and it may be, I don't have an IT person, so we don't need to worry about resiliency, and that's not necessarily the case. On the people side of this, you need to understand the personalities that would help drive some of these types of things. There is a very emotional toll when things go bad, and that you've got to react very quickly. And you really have to have some pre-planned activities to go for that person to be able to have a good idea of what they need to work on. So on the process and system side, they need to be adjusted prior to these events. I don't know how many times we get called in because somebody has ransomware, and unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do at that point in time. I'm going to go talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But this is why these process and systems need to be adjusted prior to these malicious events. And, can we see some things on the infrastructure side? Do we have technology that can, we see some performance impacts already happening? Can we get ahead of that? But ultimately today, what we're going to be talking about is the cyber side of this. And really, when we think of cyber, when it comes into resilience, it's being able to adapt and respond at the same time. So let's talk about some booming industries that we probably have seen over the last couple of years. You know, one of the areas that we saw, you know, Zoom, Netflix, you know, their revenues soared tremendously when the pandemic started. Other industries did also. And so I wanted to do a little bit of analysis on a particular industry that outshined companies like Zoom and Netflix. And so I found some of these key attributes that I wanted to really kind of share with you. This organization, this industry, they're early adopters of cloud, cyber, and robotics, and they have really revolutionized the as-a-service. So they've also cornered the market on change management by utilizing rigid, agile processes. So the beautiful thing that they can do is they can develop and deploy new code within minutes. It could be a mobile code, it could be a web code, and then publish it to thousands of customers. And that is a really, really hard task to think about. They employ some of the greatest minds on the planet, so far above some of our Ivy League schools. They utilize employee appreciation programs and have a very rigid acceptance criteria from their HR departments. And from the customer service side, they have 24/7 support, 24/7, 365 support, and they even offer money-back guarantees. And on the sales and marketing side, you know, the marketing department is extremely effective into market penetration, and they easily are plugged into a globalized market estimated to reach 500 million. And so by 2025, they expect it to be 500 million opportunities. So what industry do you think we're talking about right now? So do you think it's healthcare? You think it's finance? You think it's technology?
I think it's like Uber and Lyft or something. And I'd love to see, if anyone could enter it into the chat, I'd love to see what people actually think. Maybe I want to work there, Paul.
You want to work there? Sounds like a great industry to work in, isn't it? But
very resilient.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the surprise here, but it's cybercrime. So cybercrime is a new industry, and so if we think of cyber criminals, you know, we kind of think of hackers. We think of young people shut up in a dark room full of computers, drinking Red Bull, and they have great computer skills. And so, however, the vision of a new hacker has nothing to do with today's cyber criminals. In fact, cybercrime has already ceased to be the solitary and individual activity that takes place in a cluttered and dismal room. And that's kind of always the view that we get when we think about hackers. And hacking has ceased to be a technical and recreational activity, and professional and business activity. And so experts expect cybercrime to grow 15% over the next 5 years, reaching $10.5 trillion. And so I wanted to see that number sounds gigantic, and it is big. So what I have found out is this represents the greatest transfer of economic wealth in history. It is exponentially larger than the damage inflicted by all natural disasters in a year, and will be more profitable than the global trade of major illegal drugs combined. But this next one I'm getting ready to tell you is probably something that really surprised me. If we think about what the projection is for the 2022 global GDP was going to be, it's going to be 95 trillion is the estimation. So if we take this scale of the cybercrime industry, it would be right behind China at number 3. Of course, the U.S. is number 1. Right behind China at number 3, and right in front of Japan at number 4. That's how large the GDP is for this cyber criminal activity. And with things happening like cryptocurrency, it's going to continue to grow. And you may ask yourself, well, how are they doing all of this? And it's a force multiplier. They're creating things like crime as a service, where people that have little knowledge about how to hack, they will rent their software to these individuals, and they'll make money off of it. And the thing I love the most, and this is probably the most interesting thing, and you may have noticed this yourself, but you just didn't know how it happened. 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would get a phishing email. It would be really bad English, right? I mean, just horrible. You couldn't hardly understand what they were saying. Misspellings and just it was not well. Well, they have a service now that you can give them your phishing email, and they will fix all of the English type things that they need to do to get this better. And so now when you see these phishing emails, you really can't rely on what we used to have in the past. So,
and are these organizations are like regular companies with what, vacation time? Everybody's remote work?
Yeah, it's interesting, Shannon. We see during certain holidays, even U.S.-based holidays, that things go dark. Nothing's happening. And they take vacation. They have vacation time also. The only thing I don't think they have so far is health plans. I haven't seen the bad guys or bad girls have these health plans yet. So I'm sure it's probably just a matter of time before they do that. So one more thing, just to talk about how, if you haven't got the idea now, cybercrime is a big deal. But let me tell you how big of a deal it is. So the World Economic Forum produces a global report each year, and the most recent report shows that cybersecurity failures are the 4th most perceived global risk in the next 0 to 2 years. And so I looked at what the long-term looked like from the global risk, and really in the 5 to 10 year, it falls out. Cybersecurity falls off the top 10 list. And you start asking yourself, why is that? Are we getting better at it? Are the tools getting better? Are companies getting better? Is regulations making a difference? And I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that is, but I think that maybe the perception is, we're doing what we can. We can't do anything else. And if it happens kind of scenario. So I think that's probably part of what we're seeing. So just to kind of recap a few things that we looked at, you've got to have a resiliency plan to be able to take care of these risks. Cybercrime is big business, and if the last 3 or 4 minutes that I've been talking about it, if you haven't understood that, it is big, big, big business. And ransomware is always going to be the greatest resiliency risk that you have as far as a company goes. Okay, so let's go to our second question. Let me forward this here. So do you have someone accountable for cybersecurity in your company? This is going to be pretty easy, yes or no answer.
You may need to hit refresh to get that to work. If you see that button, just click it. Oh, man. And don't be shy. No one can see your answer. I see we only have around 20 people responding. Okay.
Okay. That's good. It's always interesting to ask this question because a lot of times I see it flipped, Shannon, when these things happen, and it's really kind of scary sometimes to see that really a lot of people don't have an understanding. So that is great to see. Great to see. So this will help for the 25 that have somebody accountable for it. If they're not on the call, this presentation is going to work very well for them. For the 2 that don't have it, this presentation is going to work very well for you because we have things that you can start from scratch, and there are things that you can augment part of that conversation. So thank you, everyone, for participating in that.
And I'll say, Paul, it's interesting just from working directly with clients, and first of all, you're amazing at it. We love that you get involved when clients have questions. And it's interesting because kind of what that role is, you've got somebody responsible for it, but it's a very overwhelming job to have because there's so many ways. When we hear clients talk about it, they're kind of attacking it in different ways. And I don't know, and I guess that just proves the point that hopefully you all find this presentation helpful and resources. We have had one question come through, and this is such a great question. If phishing emails are adapting to become more legitimate, quote unquote, how do we as consumers sharpen our skills to identify them? And that, I mean, with business email compromise, this is my PSA for today. If anybody's changing any banking information, it's an ACH, it's a wire, if anybody's making any change in these emails, always call back the number on record versus the number in the email to confirm the legitimacy. So your customer relationship system, go to the salesperson, call in, not the number on the email, and verify that that's accurate. That is where we're seeing the largest customer losses. PSA over. So from your perspective, Paul, what are you seeing as a way that we can get better?
Yeah, so let's just talk about what a business email compromise looks like versus just a regular phishing email. So business email compromise is maybe somebody, it's a partner, it's somebody in your company, but it is a legitimate email. But somebody has taken over that particular email. That's kind of what we call business email compromise. And that is difficult to identify because even the technology that we use says, oh, Shannon has been trading emails with this person for the last 5 years, so it's got a good score, so I'm going to let that go on into Shannon and not inspect it that much. So what you have to look at from those perspectives is if you have been dealing with Shannon and you know kind of their language, she probably doesn't start a salutation with regards or anything along that line, right? So what you'll find out is even if somebody has access to that, they still go to their native dialect. They still do their proper salutations along that line. And then just kind of what Shannon said, if it's something unusual, of, hey, I need you to change this wiring instruction, and I can't talk right now because I'm in a meeting. It's always these things of if you needed to kind of validate and say, hey, I'm going to call you, Shannon, just to kind of make sure that this is accurate. They will have 75 different reasons why they can't take your call, and that's what helps you find these types of scenarios like that. And it's just the same way with non-BECs, just the phishing emails that come across. But you really kind of have to, it's like muscle memory. And I tell people this that have a good, workout routine. If you practice on identifying what these look like, if your company has a software that helps you do that, that muscle memory starts to get to where it needs to be, and you need to understand what that looks like. And so I think as companies, as leaders, we need to help them continue to build that muscle memory. That's a great question. Okay, so how do we identify the cybersecurity risk here? So let's talk about, I'm here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Being in Oklahoma, we're used to having these unexpected forces such as natural disasters, more deliberate type things like geopolitical issues is on the top of everything right now because of the Russia-Ukraine. Yeah, that can have some cyber resiliency issues as part of that, and it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. But really, the largest area that we see is in digital business or digital transformation, whatever your company is going to call it. And why is that? And it's because we are moving more things to cloud and internet more than we ever have in the past. And let me say this, it's not because it's cloud and it's not because it's the internet, but it's because of the velocity of how quickly we try to get things out in the cloud and out in the internet that we make mistakes. And as we make mistakes, these threat actors find ways to be able to infiltrate our networks. So I'm going to kind of warn you right now, if there's any slide that you want to take away from today, it is this one slide. This slide to me talks about how we would deal, and let's just say we're dealing with the ransomware. This framework works in so many different ways, but I'm going to show you today let's just take the threat of ransomware and let's run it through this framework. So I'm going to start with the identify area. So let's talk about IT asset management. And so to defend our network against ransomware, you need to be able to identify your systems and your software. I know I saw there were some CIOs on here and they're probably shaking their head going, yes, Paul, that is exactly what we need to do. But we don't only need the basic information of this, we need to have some context to the assets, such as, is it internet facing? Does it contain critical data? Is it in a third-party location, and so on? And this is so important because if you are a practitioner that does cybersecurity, you know that you can't protect what you don't know. So if assets are out there and they're on your network and you don't know they're there, nobody's patching them, nobody's taking care of them. And so what are the next steps? So once you have identified these critical systems, you need to identify the secondary and tertiary components that are important to that business. So I'm going to have a graph here a little bit later that's going to talk about, it's going to start at the top and then kind of go 4 levels down, and I'll explain to you why that's important. But we also have to understand, what does our supply chain look like? And so we all know about supply chain issues right now. This wasn't really a term that we used a lot in our normal day activities until we couldn't get chips and gas and all these other kind of things, right? But that's where we see a lot of this coming from. And believe it or not, ransomware threat actors typically use the same type of attack methods each time. They may switch it up a little bit, but there is a framework out there called the attack framework, and it will be in the appendix. I put a lot of these things I'm talking about in the appendix, and it will tell you how, if you want to see how Conti works, it will tell you from A to Z how they do their activities. And as practitioners and as people that want to make sure that our company stays afloat, we need to be able to prioritize those risk mitigations. So I'm going to talk about the top 3 out of all threat actors that we see and how they do it. So the first one is they exploit vulnerabilities in our systems. So if we're not patching things like Log4j, they're going to get into our network. Vulnerabilities in people, we kind of already spoke about it with the question that Shannon asked earlier around that. That is a high-risk area for us and most companies. And then lastly, number 3, vulnerabilities in third parties. And so the reason why they may go to third parties is because their level of cybersecurity may be less than yours, but they have access into it. So they're looking for the least common denominator here, and a lot of times it is your third parties. And lastly, I'll talk on the identify area on somewhat of a governance topic. So ransomware risk must be factored into the risk management governance in order to establish the appropriate cybersecurity policies. And these policies, I know we think about policies like, oh yes, just one more policy that we need to do, but these policies help drive strategic planning for things like tabletop exercises. So can you do a tabletop exercise that simulates what real threat actors will do, and let your executive leadership team see what that looks like? And then that way they get a real world experience without having a real world experience. And I think that's one of the keys I wanted to kind of touch on today. Okay, so let's go to protect. So under protect, this may be some of the IT controls or business controls that we may use. And unfortunately, we know that ransomware attacks have humans in the driver's seat. IBM just released a study not too long ago that said human error is the main cause of 95% of cybersecurity breaches. And so you need a comprehensive training program that can help reduce. And you're going to see me say this multiple times, and it's kind of that muscle memory. Train your employees. And so if an employee clicks on a link, a lot of times the question is it the carrot or the stick? We're not going to make any headway as cyber practitioners if we keep shaming people when they have these type of areas, because really, ultimately, our employees are our last line of defense, and we've got to give them the right skill sets to be able to continue to protect us. So we know that always there's going to be a certain amount of employees and vendors that will eventually fall for these phishing attacks. And one of the things I wanted to bring up, and it's probably things you've heard often, but want to kind of reinforce. Once we started sending people home from the office, we had these remote access, and we wanted to make sure that we could do it appropriately. So multi-factor authentication is one of those technologies that help us drive down the risk in these areas. And so I want to make sure everybody understands what that looks like, because if we really ever have a cyber or a ransomware attack and we feel like, yeah, we need to go ahead and pay this, only 8% of companies recover all the data after they pay the ransomware. So you may never get that. You may never get that back. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the detect side. So early detection of ransomware is vital. A lot of times we always love to prevent, but if you can't prevent, you need to be able to see what it is to be able to respond. And so to do this appropriately, you've got to have some type of telemetry, some type of data that helps you drive these systems and sensors to be able to do that. And, you know, some of these systems and sensors can be firewalls, it can be logs from your computers. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. But in your detection technologies, you have to continue to improve those methods. And so, you know, once you improve those methods, you need to make sure that you're continually doing what the threat actors are doing. It's not the fact that you're just going to go throw in antivirus and that's going to work and you're going to be good. You've got to continue to understand what these threat actors can do. And this is something that is free. All of these things that I'm talking to you about are free. You probably need some human capital behind it to be able to facilitate some of the conversations. But everything I'm talking about right now costs absolutely nothing. So, you know, most experts will call what we do as trying to minimize the attack surface. And so if you're one of the 2 people that has nobody responsible for it, or if you're part of the 27 that has responsible for it, where do you start? And really, you should start with vulnerability scans of your network. And so once you've identified the vulnerabilities, you have a choice, because there's a lot of them. You can either choose to reduce the risk or mitigate it. Soon, those ransomware threat actors will find it. And so we've got to continue to do this. And so you have the tools, you have the understanding to be able to prevent these things. This is I'm not going to say this is trivial to do, because it's not. But everything I'm talking about right now can be mitigated to some level. And so I don't want to throw this doomsday mentality out here, because what I'm talking about today, you guys can do, and it will help your company tremendously. So let's talk about respond. You know, sharing information about the attack is crucial. So if you're in the middle of it, you're going to want to share it with law enforcement. You're going to want to share it with your legal departments. You're going to want to share it in some ways to other companies to kind of help them identify, hey, I want to make sure we don't get hit by this area. So I just wanted to validate that that's something we need to continue to look at. And when we respond, our activities require an order of operations. And so we have an effective, efficient response process. It requires pre-established criteria. So this is typically called like a cyber incident response plan. In the appendix, you can create one in about 3 minutes. And so this is another one of those topics I want to make sure you understand. It's not going to cost a lot of money to be able to create this program. So if we don't follow the order of operations and we're trying to respond to these, we may think we have got them out of the network, but they're still there because you didn't find out where patient 0 was. And patient 0 was the first attack, the first person that's going to have, or the first computer that's going to have the most telemetry for us to be able to identify them. And so the response will take both a technical and a business response. So if you plan correctly, everyone knows their role in the process, from communication to initiation of the recovery plans, and then coordination with key internal and external stakeholders is important, such as stemming the spread of misinformation. Because I don't know how many times we've seen people that have posted online that a company has been attacked and it hasn't been attacked. And then the last pillar of this is going to be the recovery side. And so time is money when it comes to the recovery efforts for ransomware attack. So they'll typically give you, hey, CFO, hey, CIO, you have 2 to 3 days to respond and pay in cryptocurrency, or we'll delete your data and post it online. So the clock is ticking, and you must decide your path in a matter of hours, and sometimes it's minutes. And so immediately initiating the recovery plan after the root cause has been identified can cut your losses. And so just as we had an order of operations for the cyber incident response plan, you had the same thing for the recovery plan. Your critical systems and software need to come up first during the recovery, and others are going to have to wait. And so during the recovery, you will have multiple response tracks. So think of it as a 8-lane highway that you're having to manage. And the largest will be around communications of the incident. And this was something that really came to light with some of our executive leadership teams is, how's the internal and external communication, how does that going to work? Because you have to communicate with the threat actor, but do you want to go talk to the threat actor? Who's raising their hand to go talk to the threat actor, right? Nobody wants to do that because if you make them upset, they will just go ahead and initiate everything else that they have. So this 5-pillar program that I just kind of walked you through is adapted from the Cybersecurity Framework. And in the back of the appendix, you're going to see a framework of how you can set this up. And I just did it from the lens of ransomware. And you'll be able to do the same thing across other areas.
I know we're at 11:40, but I might just add one note. Well, first of all, remember, we'll send out the recording, and we'll also send out the deck that has all of the links in it that Paul's referencing that he covers at the end. But, it's some people, I'll just say when clients call in, and Paul's been fabulous to work with, some clients don't even know there's been a ransomware attack. Kind of like where it hurts is how I describe it. It'll be like, our phone system's down. I can't get on the internet. And like all these systems are locked, and we'll get a call, I can't get into online banking. And they describe all these things that aren't working. And sometimes, and it's probably not the IT person we're talking to because I'm sure they're all over it, but a lot of times our clients that we talk with don't even know that it's happened, but we're able to say, I think that you've had a cyber attack, which may be ransomware, maybe something else. So just know there's not like a sign that you get on your computer screen that says you've been ransomwared, right? Like it's all these things that feel like nothing's really working today. And that's probably the biggest symptom.
Yeah.
A bad day.
Yeah, definitely so. Okay, so take those 5 pillars. I told you it's called the Cybersecurity Framework. This is an easy framework for you to go back to your leaders or to look at it yourself. And you'll be able to kind of see the security frameworks, goes down to a security catalog of controls, and then what it looks like from your security processes. And so what that kind of looks like in our example here, so that you have the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, you feel like you need to have better transaction protection around that. So for us, it may be a wires or something along that line. You also have to look at the control catalog and go, oh, okay, ISO 27001 says you can secure logon procedures, and here's how you protect against brute forces. And then on our side, Acme Bank, they say, okay, I've got a number here for this. So every electronic banking application that has a critical system must use MFA. So it seems simplistic, but this is really how you continually just go down this line to identify what your risk looks like. Okay, so just to recap, and then I think we can take some questions. I've seen some things pop up. We have 3 drivers that we need to make sure we understand. Risk management is extremely needed from an organizational perspective. And all of these frameworks that I'm kind of showing you right now, there is not one that's going to fit everything that you need. And so you find what fits for your company and you make that work. Okay, before I go to the question that we have, Shannon, is there some other questions we want to address?
I'd say let's go ahead and do the question. If you have any further questions, please type them in the chat or Q&A, and we'll cover them right after the survey.
Yep. Okay, so let's. This is our last question, and based upon these frameworks I just spoke about, how do you feel like your company? Do you have one? Do you use multiple? You don't even know what I'm talking about, kind of things. What does that look like for your company? Okay, see a lot of people using multiple ones. And just for transparency, from my department, we use multiple ones also. We'll pick the components that we like. We'll make it be okay-ish, and that's how we continue to work on ours. So very good, very good. Appreciate the feedback on that.
And that may segue into a question that I've got here, which is, you know, let's say we're just amazing. We've already done all these things, and we're just using this as a resource to confirm that. How do we then take it to the next level and work with our third-party providers, you know, ensuring information's in the cloud? Is that what we want to have done? How do we know that they've got the right protocols in place? What do we ask?
Yeah, so a lot of companies have a vendor management office, and if you don't have a vendor management office, what they perform is we are getting ready to, let's say we're getting ready to roll out our new wire system. And there are 4 vendors that we use for this. And so we'll vet them from a cybersecurity perspective. And so we'll ask questions about, you know, how do you do incident response? You know, what does it look like from your control set? And those controls that I kind of showed everybody that, hey, this is what we're going to do. They need to give you that. They need to give you their controls, and your operations people need to be able to identify if this is a risky vendor or third party, or do you feel comfortable enough to move forward with that? That's what we have seen most companies do. It's still very difficult because a lot of times they'll give you a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, and everybody says, okay, they're all good because they have a SOC 1 or SOC 2, and that's never the case. You got to have some conversations. Is there anything else, Shannon?
That's it for right now.
Okay. Okay. So there are really 2 key pillars that we want to talk about today when it comes to cyber readiness and cyber recovery. And I'm gonna go into a little bit of a deep dive here, but I wanted you to see it at a very high level as to what this looks like and what it's going to mean moving forward. So what are some elements of cyber readiness that we really need to take a look at? Really, it comes from the top. You know, what does the investment look like? What does your culture look like? And how do we continue to make strides in these areas to make sure we are doing what we need to do? And so it first starts with the leaders. I saw from the titles here, there are a number of leaders here. And so this really needs to be a component of that cyber strategy. And the leaders can also help with the investment conversations to help drive the culture. And this is a really key important point here. So the staff, we've spoke about, you know, we have a workforce, and, you know, what we've used the terms in the past is our workforce is our weakest link. And really, they're not. If you think about it, they're your last line of defense. So out of all of these things that you have working, you've paid for all these types of technologies and tools, but you're not training your employees to be that last line of defense. We need to have better vigilance in this area. We've got to continue to protect our systems. They're going to be the lifeblood of what we do and how we stay resilient. So how do you continue to put the security parameters around those particular areas? And as we continue to go more digital, we continue to need to look at other ways of doing identity and access management. And so I know there's a lot of areas now that we want to go passwordless. And you know, that is just now starting to become a thing. But to go passwordless, you still have to have great identity and access management controls to be able to do that. And so as we continue to roll out our digital strategies, we need to continue to make sure that we're doing the appropriate things like pen testing before they go to the internet and making sure that they're meeting the appropriate standards. Backups, when we talk about resiliency, you know, I said it's not really just about recovery. But backups are going to be extremely critical to how you manage through these types of events. And last but not least, on the crisis response, how do we limit that damage? Because you could be getting attacked right now, but there are some things you can do to kind of mitigate that as that attack is going on. Because the quicker you can get to them, the quicker you can shut them down, the least amount of data loss that you're going to have from that perspective. And again, these are kind of the top 6 areas that I kind of want to focus on from here, and we'll continue to give all of this information to you guys in the future. So I did speak about this particular slide as to how do we do cyber recovery. So let's talk about what does our business critical applications look like? What do they look like from a perspective of, this is the keys to the kingdom. If this application doesn't work, we don't make any money. And let's say that was logistics. Well, logistics is an important platform, but you just can't worry about the logistics platform because you're going to have some things around purchasing that you're going to have to make sure are up and running. You're going to have the sourcing aspect. You're going to have the supplier management and warehouse management. So when you think about what all those critical areas are, when I said you had to go down to secondary, tertiary type components, this is what you have to do to be able to recover appropriately. I know a lot of companies are probably already doing this, but if you're not doing this, this is the kind of deep dive you need to be able to get into your organization. Okay, so last section I have is how do we measure the cybersecurity effectiveness? And a lot of times there are going to be, maybe some metrics that we want to look at. I took some of these from companies that have, kind of made it public. And so some of them are like, what's the percentage of our crown jewels that meet the cybersecurity standards, such as like NIST Cybersecurity Framework? And how is there an interconnectedness type of component to it? So are we doing business in multiple countries to where our attack surface needs to be remediated quicker, faster, better than what it has in the past? And what about a preparedness role? What does your team look like? Do you have the right percentage of overall roles that can help in these particular scenarios? And that's a key point that I think you want to be able to do. I have others on here, and I know some people like the quantitative type of activities, but there's also the qualitative type of activities that we need to consider. And I really like this cyber quadrant that Accenture has really put together. And it really is around the state of cyber resilience, which they spoke to about 3,500 security executives. And some of the key measures that they really spoke about was, if we follow this path, how do we stop more attacks? How do we find breaches faster? How do we fix breaches faster? And then how do we reduce the overall impact? And as you can tell on this, the bottom side is the vulnerable. It's the weak side. But what does that really mean? How does that really work from a perspective of, if you're trying to figure out where you sit on this, if you're a cyber champion, and what it's really saying is your cyber organization and your business organization are in tune. They know what we need to fix. They know how quickly we got to come up. But on the bottom side, security is not aligned with the business strategy. They have an immature organization, and those are kind of the two areas of this distraction there, or abstraction. So the 5%, if you look at these numbers, 5% of those 3,500 executives consider themselves as cyber champions. And as you can see on the bottom left, the vulnerable, that's 55%. And so this is just kind of a way that we still know that we've got some work to do. As US-based companies, we still have a lot on our plate. Most of us fall into some type of critical infrastructure from a government perspective. We're going to continue to see these executive orders come out from the president around cybersecurity, because it's that important to the country. So I put 3 key points here. I know we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to go ahead and show this resource area here. When you get this, a lot of the things that I have kind of put together today are based off of some of these frameworks. And so I wanted to make this as a takeaway document for everybody here, so that you can start having conversations when you get back into the office, and that way what your next path should be. Shannon, one more thing. I added this to it because I think I always get asked, what are the 10 processes that we need to make sure we do right? And I'm always going to tell everyone cybersecurity awareness is number one. And we have got to continue to move forward on making our employees aware. And that's all I had.
Okay, well, let's launch into some questions here and pull them up just one moment. Given the speed at which technology and threat actors are moving, as a company, how far out should we plan for a cybersecurity roadmap? 12 months, 18 months?
Yeah, 18 months is probably appropriate. The technologies change so fast in the cyber world, and if you get too far ahead, then it's really hard to. We have a lot of CFOs on here. When we talk about how are we going to forecast our budget for the next year, there's a lot of history, that you can kind of go back on and say, okay, I'm going to make some inferences, and this is what it's going to look like. But 18 months is typically what we look at, and but strategic planning happens for us almost on a quarterly basis because it just changes that fast. And the moment that you think you've got a good strategic plan, then it's like the Mike Tyson thing, you don't know until you get punched in the mouth. But that's what happens to us quite a bit.
Okay. Another question about kind of the best place to put information and have your services. Is it best if you have, the company has their kind of data and whatnot hosted in the cloud?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. And, I would say probably 15 years ago when I first started hearing about cloud, I was like, cybersecurity people are never going to love cloud because it's going to be inherently riskier than anything else. But I can tell you that you can do things in the cloud that may even be more secure than what you have in your data centers. And the reason why that is because they are producing these new technologies that are embedded into the cloud services that cybersecurity is built into it. A lot of times when we have things in the data centers, that's not the same situation. So I still think cloud, if you're concerned about that, you can do it appropriately and still be able to protect customer information.
Okay, excellent. If you have any questions, please go ahead and submit them to the chat. As a reminder, we're going to redistribute tomorrow morning. You'll get an email or sometime tomorrow with a link to the recording, a link to the deck that will have the hyperlinks that Paul has shared. I've got a question here about, it seems like, the human firewall, meaning all of us as employees of an organization are kind of either the greatest link, the weakest link, or the greatest link. How has the bank gone about, I personally think we've done a great job, but the question here is how do you bring this reality to your employees? How do you start getting them comfortable with it, understanding what to do, what not to do?
Yeah, a lot of times I think people see cybersecurity as this black box, like I don't understand it, I'm never going to understand it, I don't want to understand it. But if we can demystify exactly what these things mean and have them in kind of these bite-sized chunks and say, here's how multi-factor authentication, here's how multi-factor authentication works, and how you should also use it in your personal life with your bank or whatever. And so what we have done is we continue to train our employees, not from an old, stodgy kind of watch this 35-minute video, take this, 25-question test kind of thing. And if you do it and that's your thing, that's fine. But it's not really what we have seen has been that works for us. And so we will always create 2 to 3 minute videos about how things that we're seeing from threat actors and how quickly it comes and what their responsibility is. And, employees are smart. I don't think we give them, we always think that cybersecurity is for a small amount of people, and that's never true. What I have found when we do these things, our employees are extremely savvy around cybersecurity. And I imagine for others on this, they're probably going to say the same thing about their company. And we just need to give them the information in the right means in the right way.
Love it. Well, thank you, Paul. I think this has been very helpful in learning what we can do as IT practitioners and then just general employees of our organization to promote and support cybersecurity awareness and resiliency. And I look forward to sharing this presentation and giving everyone access to the links and ways to kind of implement something today to make your organization stronger. And Paul, as always, thank you for joining us as a speaker. And thank you, attendees, for giving up your time to learn more about keeping your organization strong. Our next, our follow-up session, again, the third in our three-part series will be this fall. So if you have any ideas or topics you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to forward those requests to your bankers and treasury officers. We'd love to have them. Have a great afternoon. This concludes our webinar.